Now, welcome along to another edition of Isolation Interviews for Hospital Radio and my YouTube channel. And I'm super excited about my guest today. He is the fantastically talented Hugh Bonneville. Thank you so much for joining me.
That's my pleasure. Nice to be talking to you.
Now, obviously, life at the moment is very strange. How did you find early lockdown, and how have you found now that we're kind of easing out? How have you found the whole situation?
I think, like so many millions of people, utterly confused and bewildered at the start. But actually, I secretly was quite enjoying actually not having to sort of be out and about too much. But then, of course, you go through so many emotions. The uncertainty of it all, one being conscious that so many people are in the same boat and suffering. So there was actually that sense of being connected, but also concerned about those who are most vulnerable, particularly those in hospitals. And many acquaintances and friends of mine who had that awful experience of not being able to be with their loved ones when they were needed most. The pride we took in the NHS and the key workers. Never felt more proud of them, actually. And so that was those initial thoughts. And then the easing of restrictions, I suppose, over the summer, which everyone needed. But I think what has I found not frustrating, but slightly surprising, is that people are surprised that we're now entering a new phase. I think when it was very first outlined, I remember saying to my wife, this is probably going to be a year. We're likely to be in and out of this for over a year. And so this sense of shock and outrage that we might be going into another period of having to be more restrictive about the way we live our lives, it should not come as a surprise, and we should be sensible about it. And of course, I would hate to be a politician right now trying to manage the changing situation. But the fact is, cases are rising. Thankfully, they seem to be currently where are we now? We're in the middle of September. Thankfully, the hospitalizations aren't increasing as dramatically as they did on the first, the first wave of this. But who's to know? We're about to enter the coldest and most vulnerable part of the year. So. I think we're a long way to go yet, and I think we're going to have to dig deep in terms of our patience and tolerance of each other, of our leaders, of our local communities. We're going to have to look out for each other all over again.
And I think the other thing is, a lot of people have said that it's given us a newfound respect for our NHS, who are doing a fantastic job, and they have been, for so long, people have kind of taken them for granted. And would you say that this has kind of brought them back to the forefront, and we really do, appreciate them again? It's like we kind of forgot about them for a little while.
I think without doubt, my parents were both educated in the NHS. My father and my mother met at St Mary's Hospital, Paddington, when they were training. My dad as a doctor, my mother as a nurse. So I grew up with the NHS family around me. My father, who passed away earlier this year, he got very depressed in the 70s and 80s by the rise of the management culture. When he started in the NHS, it was sort of Hattie Jakes ran the ward. It was the ward sisters ran everything. And I think he found the administrative rise or the invention of triplicate and everything else that started to descend on all practitioners in the medical services, found that tough to cope with. And I think, to be able to see the frontline workers really come back and show what they are made of this year has been really important. And I hope those who have decried the NHS over some years, and let's face it, that has happened. I think, many trusts will acknowledge there's been a lot of managerial problems, etc. But the frontline workers, those who give help when it's needed most, they are remarkable people. They have never changed. Their dedication has never changed. But it's been put in the spotlight this year. And so if you can be grateful for anything out of this whole horrible situation, that is important, that those who work at the sharp end and who save lives and who care day in, day out and put their own lives at risk in situations like this, they deserve our huge respect and thanks.
I'd also say that we've kind of, as a world, really, we've learnt new ways of doing things. Obviously, we're doing this interview over Zoom, something which I personally hadn't done, before now. I was used to either going and doing them face-to-face or over the phone. So would you say that a lot of people, yourself included, would you say it's kind of taught us a new way of living?
I think it has, and let's hope that it's a temporary way of living, and let's hope, but at the same time, let's take the best of it. I think we've we've learned that we don't need to travel unnecessarily. We've learned that perhaps a lot of things can be done from home, but nothing beats face-to-face contact. My world is performance and interacting with people. It's albeit some of it on screen, so therefore there's a sort of gauze between you and the audience. But most of my career has been on stage, and that live interaction that we all want, whether it's in theatre or in ballet, dance, in music venues. We want to be in a collective experience. That's where we thrive as human beings. So let's not forget that, while at the same time taking the best of what we've learned in lockdown, about a bit of compassion and tolerance, but also, yes, that we don't need to necessarily get on a plane to go to Frankfurt for a half-hour meeting. So I think that sense of caring more about our environment, our mental health, and others are benefits that we can hopefully take forward into the future.
And also, I'd like to think that it's also brought us closer together. I mean, we've seen communities who have come together to look after the elderly, the vulnerable. So do you think that going forward as a nation, that we will stay closer, or do you think things might go back to normal once we get back to some form of norm?
Well, we do have let's face it, we do have a very short memory. I mean, history has a habit of repeating itself because we don't learn the lessons. Like we were just saying, people sort of think it's all gone away. No, it hasn't gone away. We are likely to repeat things unless we do look after each other and do all the things like hand washing and all those basic things that we sort of learned a mantra about back in March. But I do think that what you just wanted to pick up on what you're saying about communities coming together and staying together. I mean, I live in the countryside in West Sussex, on the border of West Sussex and Hampshire, and very early on we got together a group of volunteers, and I know this was true in parishes all over the country, and obviously in cities and towns as well. We're a rural community, and we within days we'd set up a website. We'd got 50 volunteers. We'd created a sort of dad's army, if you like, of people who could help when the need was there. And we've been in touch with neighbouring parishes and worked out how to support each other. And we got to a point in the sort of mid-late summer where actually the demands on our time as volunteering, doing getting prescriptions and food services, etc., was dwindling. But I'm afraid I'm fairly confident that we're going to need to use those people again. But that structure is now in place, which is great, and hopefully we can. It would be great to think we don't need it, but to know that it's there, that there is a cushion, a net of support. That of course things like parish councils were there to provide, but weren't called upon very much. But now we know that it's there, and what impressed me most was the fact that people came forward incredibly quickly, and that we really were looking out for our neighbours, those who were having to self-isolate, those who really couldn't go outside the front door really. So we know that network is there for the future. We don't want it to become oppressive or being, nosy Parker, but we are there. And I do hope that can continue across the country.
Now, for you personally, how were you affected when lockdown struck? I mean, were you busy working on anything at the time, or were you on a break? How did it affect you work-wise?
Actually, it was the most amazing coincidence. I just finished a film about about Roald Dahl that I'd done with Keeley Hawes, and we'd finished that around Christmas time. So we were into the post-production period, and I was sort of in pre-production, but at a script stage. So very early days of developing another film, and 2 or 3 projects that were around, we'd sort of agreed wouldn't happen until the second half of the year anyway. Well, now they're being pushed into next year, realistically. And so actually it was a sweet spot, funnily enough. But it did mean that, strangely, I had to create a sort of outdoor studio at home and do all my voice post-production on the Roald Dahl movie from home, which was quite eccentric. Going around auditioning different rooms in the house for the sound team. And I said, look, if I put my microphone in this room, what does that sound like? Does that match the room that we used on set? If I needed to re-record some dialogue and so on. And so the weirdest one was having to do outdoor scenes, because I had to wait until nighttime because the birds were singing. And then there was one scene where I sort of, shout and lose my temper. And so I think the neighbours must have thought, what on earth's going on at Hugh's house as I recorded these lines. But anyway, to their great credit, the production team managed to do the entire film during lockdown, the post-production of the film during lockdown, including the score, recording the music, which was done at, I think, in Air Studios in London, but on 2 separate days, so the strings could meet socially and do a recording socially distanced on one day, and then the the wind section would meet on another day, so that obviously they couldn't. Yes, slight glitch there, but I'm back in the room. So Debbie Wiseman, the composer, had this extraordinary experience of conducting, 2 sessions on 2 different days to try and bring the sound together, and it worked. So, again, new ways of working. Incredibly impressed by the way that post-production was able to work remotely.
I mean, it does show that you can do so many amazing things. I mean, obviously, you guys got together. You had Sarah Parish and Jason Watkins. You all did a kind of a virtual episode that, is sort of a different way of doing a show. So, I mean, working with them over Zoom, what was that like?
Well, that was fun. We'd been, so W1A, which was a show that we did on the BBC a few years ago, really did lend itself to Zoom, and we immediately thought of that when everyone started using these outlets, these possibilities of communicating, because W1A was all about, for those who don't know, it was all about sort of bureaucracy at the BBC, or it frankly could be any organisation, but it happened to be set in the BBC, where lots of meetings happen about nothing really. Anyway, we tried to persuade John Morton, who wrote and directed the show, to do us a little series. But in fact, he's so busy that he couldn't. And so it took weeks and weeks and weeks to lock him down and get him to write a 5-minute piece. So, which we then took off him. And I said, oh, it's all right, I'll edit it, don't worry. And so we spent a couple of hours rehearsing, and then we quickly realized that, of course, with Zoom, there's a slight lag and all this. And so then we recorded it with our own, we put in funny backgrounds and that sort of thing. And then I started editing, and blow me down, it took 3 days to edit because of the time lag, and W1A goes at a furious pace. And I soon learnt about, on my little iMovie, how to try and iron out all the glitches and all the delays and lags. And we just popped it out on YouTube one night, and it sort of went a bit mad. It was great. Unfortunately, John Morton really is tied up now on his new show, so we won't be getting another script out of him. But maybe if we go into a sort of winter lockdown, then maybe between us will come up with an improvised version.
I mean, one of my early guests on Isolation Interviews was Jason Watkins, who I've met a few times, and he's such a lovely guy. So you must love working with him, and obviously Sarah Parish as well.
Absolutely. No, Jason and I, well, in fact, and Sarah, we've worked together over the years a few times, and they're great company, and Monica Dolan and Dave Westhead and all the other gang of W1A. It was a very happy show to do, even though it was incredibly fast paced to shoot. And, as I've said many times, normally on a film set, you're in between setups when the cameras and lights are moving around. There's a bit of downtime and you sort of do the crossword, have a cup of tea. But on W1A, because it was such a, frenetically paced show, and all the script was so delicately honed, we spent every single moment we could just bashing the lines, running the lines, because we didn't want to let John Morton down. But they're great talents. I've just been watching Jason again on Des last night, which was about the Janice Nielsen case, and his range and versatility is extraordinary. Jason, he's one of our finest actors, and I love watching him as much as I love working with him.
Now, one of the big projects for yourself, which I think kind of really, brought you to the forefront, was, of course, Downton Abbey. Such a hit. I mean, when you first kind of became involved in that project, did you ever realize how big it would become? And not just, the British who love it, the Australians love it, the Americans love it, everyone loves it. So did you ever know how big it would become? No,
absolutely not. And no one ever, anyone who says they knew from the start that it was going to be a hit is a big fibber on any project. No, I read it and loved it. And I think what was interesting was that I wanted to know what happened next when I read it. This is before it was cast or anything. And I think that really translated onto the screen, in that people started to get hooked on it and binged it basically, and wanted just one more episode. So it did have that addictive quality. And no, we were as surprised as anyone that it started rolling out around the world and became as beloved as it did. Delighted, obviously. I think it took us a year or so to realise that it really was sort of hitting a chord wherever it went. Because at first we thought, well, maybe it's just because we're coming out of a recession and people are a bit glum and want something a bit more reassuring. But then actually that changed, and as it took several years for it to reach all the territories around the world, and each of them had the same reaction. So there was something within it, something about the stories and the characters that everyone everywhere, be they in China or Brazil, that latched onto. And we're delighted that they did, and that we ended up making a movie.
I mean, that was the great thing with it, is it was such a great escapism for people, something that's completely, there wasn't really anything like it on television at the time. And also you had, the people upstairs like yourself, and then obviously you had the difference of obviously then the people in the servants' quarters. So you really got that difference of, the rich and the poor, really.
Well, you did, and you had, as Julian Fellows, who created and wrote the show, as he'd done with Gosford Park, he said that the English country house between the wars is really the one place, apart from a hospital or a police station, where you can get a genuine cross-section of society passing through legitimately, or maybe an airport, but that's more transitory even. And he's absolutely right, and the way that he structured the show, because he was a fan of the soaps, he loved Corrie, he loved The West Wing, so you got these fast-paced scenes. And if you got bored of one character, there'd be another one along in 25 seconds. They're very short scenes mostly. And obviously the sumptuous setting and characters and stories that you could really engage with. Some of them were daft, some of them were quite dark at times. But on the whole, it was a show that the number of letters and notes we got from people saying that I used to watch it with my gran or with my grandson, as well as my son or mum or whatever. But it did seem to bring families together, and there's not that many shows, as much as one loves Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones, that not that many shows that can bring generations of families together.
I mean, also you had that amazing backdrop of Highcliffe Castle. So, I mean, going to work at Highcliffe Castle, what was that like? Because it must be like pinch me moment every day.
It was really. Apart from, pinch me because I'm so freezing cold in February was certainly one thing. But by the time you got to May and late May and June, when we usually wrapped up there, and the grass was was growing and lush, and the ice cream van came every so often on hot days. It was a beautiful place to work, and so genuinely every single day as we drove up the drive and you could glimpse the turret, I used to think, I can't believe this is such a great office to work in. It was a real privilege, and it's become, it is the most significant character in the show.
And I mean, of course, the movie was such a success. Do you think we will see another movie anytime soon? Oh, well, obviously once, COVID's gone away.
Well, I mean, there's certainly talk of one, and it would be great. I think the way that was received, because we were nervous that, would our audience get out of its armchairs and actually go to the cinema? Well, they did. And I think Focus Features, who produced it, were staggered, frankly. It became their biggest ever movie, and so I think they're keen to do one. We all had a nice time doing it. You're not there for 6 months like you were in the series. You're there for 10 weeks or something. And actually, because we all get on well, and the crew were so fantastic, and we like the place, we know the characters, it would be wonderful. And especially, I think, if let's say we were able to shoot it sometime next year, to have a treat like Downton post-COVID would be just what the doctor ordered.
And I mean, as I say, the cast is amazing. Everyone loves you. Dame Maggie Smith, I think everyone loves Dame Maggie. So for you to get to work with them again, although they must become like family in the end.
Well, they are, and we have a significant WhatsApp group which we tune into from time to time. They were. You can't help but become family, and there's no way the film would have happened had we not actually, underneath it all, got on, whatever our characters may throw at each other. And we did, when we were all profoundly appreciative of the way that the show was received, and so coming back to do the movie was a real, was a pleasure. So. It is a sort of second family, really. Over working together on and off for 10 years, it can't help but be so.
Now, the other project I must talk to you about, which is again a family favourite, is of course Paddington. So for you, filming Paddington, obviously, I think it's no spoilers. Paddington wasn't actually there, but for filming that film, it must be such a fun film to do because it's just so silly.
I did love it. It was incredibly hard work, and people might think, well, why? There was nothing there, and it must have been so easy. Actually, when Paddington didn't come out of his trailer, which was most of the time, actually having to sort of imagine that he's there, and the technical fiddliness of that was really, and you're trying to do something that's light and comedic at the same time, was really quite challenging. And Paul King, who really is Paddington, and he was the director and co-writer of both the films. He is so much, his heart is so much on the screen, and he is the spirit of those two films. And he was meticulous about getting it right. You know, we'd shoot a scene and he'd come back 3 days later and say, I got it completely wrong. I got it so wrong. We're going to do it all again. And you go, oh my goodness me. And you can't, and you know, you're not inside his head, and he's a proper visionary. And that's why those films are so beautifully turned out, and the way that they did come out was because he's so meticulous and so determined to give the audience the best experience and tell the story in the most imaginative and fun way that he possibly can. So it was tough, actually. Both the projects were tough. The first one was tough because we didn't know what Paddington was going to look like, and only when we started seeing, this was well after we'd finished filming, did I see a few bits of the animation, and I realised, wow, this isn't just a kids' film. This is a beautifully crafted creation that I don't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting that. And also, they come in for a bit of flack. From the purists who said, how can you put Paddington on a screen? He's not a Hollywood star. He's a bear from Peru who deserves to live and stay on a page, or at least in a stop motion animation in the BBC. But more to the point, some of the images of Paddington were rather sort of, people took the mick out of him because he did look like it looked like a sinister character from a horror film, and there were a lot of memes going around about Paddington sort of going around hacking people to bits or whatever. And that's because he was literally inanimate. But once he became animated, people realized that the warmth and the texture and the sheer furriness of the bear from Peru was in fact intact, and that Michael Bond, who did say after he saw the first movie, I came, I saw, I was conquered, which I thought was glorious of him. And sadly, he passed away on the last day of filming of the second film. But to have had his blessing was so important. And I think the purists have actually gone with it now and have accepted that both films work, individually very well.
And also, I mean, it attracted an amazing cast. Obviously, yourself, Julie Walters, Nicole Kidman. You obviously had Hugh Grant in the latest film. So, I mean, it was one of those. I think it's just one of those films that just everyone loved it.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, particularly on the second film, it was like a roll call of great. I remember, thinking, gosh, we've got some incredible people in the first film, but then to see, people like Richard Ayoade and Mira Sayal just turning up for one or two lines, mainly because they'd all been old mates of Paul's and worked with him in the comedy world. But to have Tom Conti, just this stream of wonderful actors in every frame. There's a delight, be it either a visual joke or an actor that you've followed over the years, as well as just a really terrific dialogue that Paul and his team came up with. The end results on both occasions, and just the quality of the animation and special effects is astonishing.
Now, I just wanted to say it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I could talk to you for hours. But just before we go, have you got any messages that you would like to give to anyone who is listening in hospital at the moment, who's obviously not having the best of times at the moment?
Well, just rest assured that you are being given the best care. We know that the NHS has endured a lot of hardship, both prior to COVID and during COVID, but you are being looked after by the best of the best. And I speak as the son of medics, and I wish you well. I know these are painful times when you are often, being prevented from seeing those you love, but you are loved, and we will all get through this, and we will all meet again.
Thank you so much, Hugh. It's been an absolute pleasure. Of course, keep safe, and thank you again for giving up your time.
And to you, all the best. Take care. Bye-bye.